G'day, welcome back to GST Junkies, Stretch and Erdy. Mr. Erdy, how are you? What's been happening?
G'day, mate. Yeah, all good. Not too bad. Chilling in London. I did a workshop last weekend, which was pretty fun. Taught my first workshop or first proper workshop in London. It's been ages since I've taught a group setting here, so that was quite cool. But other than that, not too much. Just training, working, trying to get some sun wherever and whenever I can. How about yourself?
Yeah, nice man. What was your workshop on? What were you teaching this time?
Just a bit of GST junkie stuff. The same. Some handstands, some flexibility, some strength. It was good. It was like basically how to what's the base blueprints of all of those things, and then how to put them together so you can work on multiple practices at the same time, and you're not like just specializing in just handstands or just flexibility. So it's quite like a bit of a mix mash. It's quite hard to cover everything in just 2 days of workshop. So that's why I have to try and get it like as refined as possible in terms of these are literally the only things that you need to know to start making progress. And they'll probably keep you going for the next year and a half to 3 years if you just stick with it.
Wicked man. It sounds a lot similar to what we're going to talk about today in terms of approaching complicated bodyweight skills, and I'm sure we'll bring up a lot of that stuff. But before we dive into
Yeah.
that, yeah, life's been good, man. I've been kicking back, doing a bit more training, which has been good. Focusing very much on my strength of late, so just trying to get a lot stronger. So strength's been the priority, but still doing some gymnastic skill work and still doing flexibility on the side of that. But yeah, main focus is strength. But numbers have been going up. Just did an emphasizing eccentric phase. Overhead press was 1 RM was 65 kilos. That turned into like a 3 RM. 25 kilos on the pull up 1 RM. That turned into a 4 RM. Had 30 kilo dips was a 1 RM. That turned into a 4 RM. And then had a 40 kilo chin up, which was a 1 RM, which turned into a 2 RM. So over the board, all the movements went up, and yeah, was pretty happy with the strength gains there. So yeah, going to back off the intensity and move into a little bit more volume. Try to put on a bit of size, get massive in the next phase, and then
It's about time, mate. It's about
yeah,
time.
got to eat more, mate. So we'll see how we go with that. But yeah, it should be good. And then yeah, other than that, it's just ticking away down here in South Australia, and we've been getting some warm days, but the ocean is icy cold, so that's my ice bath at the moment, which has
Wicked.
been quite good. Yeah. So, but you'll be back over here soon, mate. You'll be joining me, yeah.
Hopefully. That's the plan. We'll make it happen.
Awesome, mate. Awesome.
It
All right. So
sounds good. I've been,
today
I
we're going
was
to
going
talk
to
about. I think we got a lag or no?
Sorry, no, I just keep talking over you. I was going to say I've been following your strength work on your Instagram stories, but 65 kilos overhead press for 3 reps is quite impressive. I don't think I've ever got that for a single rep. So, yeah, good stuff.
There you go, mate. My triceps have got you covered. Maybe your biceps, maybe your pull-ups lab me, mate.
Yeah, if we combine, would be the perfect gymnast.
Yeah, that's it. Oh dear. All right, so today we're going to talk about approaching more complicated bodyweight skills. I think a good place to start would be just starting with some of the basic skills, so that when we start to talk about complicated, we can reflect back on some of the basics and talk about maybe how obviously the basics are so important. And like, I'm sure in your program right now, Eddie, you're doing a lot of the basics. And, we just talked about my strength program. I'm doing chin-ups and overhead press and dips. They're just some of the basics. What are some of the basics you want to mention, mate? What do you think is important for a lot of your, let's say, maybe beginner clients to master at the start?
Yeah, I think some of the things we spoke about in our previous episodes, get your chin ups solid, get your piked push ups and dips to a good level. Things like rows and push ups should always be somewhere in the program. They're not like they don't need to be there every phase, but they should always be there as a continuum, getting stronger over the years and either increasing the reps or strength or tempo, etc. Get these things dialed in, and then usually, and you'll see why a bit later in this episode, other things come into play.
Yeah. When you say get them dialed in, do you have a certain target that you aim for with your clients, or how do you
It's,
how do
yeah,
you say they're ready for more advanced stuff?
good to be objective here, right?
Mm.
Um, Chin ups, you're looking at, you know, I like to have people at 10, like guys. Um, I like guys to be at 10 plus on chin ups / pull ups. Girls 5, 6 plus is usually a really, really good number for a lot of girls. And then piked push-ups is really hard to be subjective or objective with, because you can make them super easy and get like 20 reps, and you can make them really hard where like one piked push-up feels like a full handstand push-up. For guys working towards handstand push-ups, I like to get people to a level of piked push-up where they can almost float their feet off the floor. So it's like either their feet do come off the floor once they're like the bottom of the piked push-up, or they feel like the feet are really light and you can see all the weight is in their hands. That's a really good level for piked push-up. And that's your vertical stuff covered. And then things like rows and push-ups, it's nice to be able to go horizontal on both of those planes and to be getting 15 plus reps. For girls, 10 plus is usually my first checkpoint, or first proper checkpoint before we get into some more skill-based training.
Yeah, awesome, mate. That's a good sort of level to have. Yeah, I find like push-ups, chin-ups, dips, all those sort of things, they're pretty sort of easy to measure because of the sort of standard that's with that. But when it starts to come into the overhead stuff with, gymnastic stuff, we're talking the inverted press, maybe feet elevated, inverted press, the pike press, moving towards eccentric handstand push-ups. Like, it's really hard to figure out, well, what percentage of your body weight are you actually lifting there? And it becomes hard to progress that sometimes. And that's where like the overhead press with a barbell or dumbbell overhead press can be a little bit more measurable, and maybe help us sort of see, well, how's the progression going? How close are we to pressing body weight strength, lifting, that sort of stuff? And it's obviously got great transfer over to handstand push-ups. You still need to practice the skill, which we'll probably talk about a little bit more. But as a strength building sort of thing, I think that's great. What about lower body? Do you do lower body sort of basics with a lot of your clients, or?
Just skip leg day, mate. It's a waste of time.
Just walk around on my hands all day. I'm fine.
Yeah. The more legs you train, the less time you got for biceps.
Yeah.
No. I have like generic standards for lower body in terms of I want everyone to be able to sit in a comfortable sort of passive squat. Things like pistol squats are really nice. Like I don't get super let's say like strict about I need everyone to be able to perform great pistols. Generally speaking, most people want to be able to achieve them when working with me anyway, so we'll work them towards it if they don't have it. But then as like a general rule of thumb when it comes to strength, I want at least body weight for squats. Like I want you to be able to at least squat your body weight for 5 reps plus. And these are like really easy lift-in standards for anyone who lifts properly. But for someone who doesn't touch a barbell, it's like, oh, okay, I've got like a good goal here to work towards. And then for deadlift, I'd want about 1.5 times body weight for reps. So they're usually my go-to sort of like hinge and squat check marks.
Yeah, nice, man. Yeah, they're sort of good levels to have, and like I said, it is very client driven. Like, what are their goals? What do they want to achieve? It's sort of funny, isn't it? In the gymnastics world, everything's very focused on upper body strength, bent arm pulling strength, bent arm pressing strength, straight arm pulling and pressing. And there's not a huge focus on the strength of the lower body, but there's a big focus on the flexibility of the lower body.
Yeah.
Do you have goals around flexibility with clients, or is that again driven really by their goals?
Yeah, so like the usually driven by their goals. If they don't have flexibility goals, so let's say somebody's just wants to work on I don't know, like upper body strength with me, or just strength training with me. If they haven't got any flexibility goals, some of the ones I'd like them to be able to achieve as a byproduct of their training is palms down on the floor with straight legs, so it's like a pike. Um, like I was saying about the squat, a nice comfortable passive squat where they can just like sit and rest in the bottom position for at least a few minutes, and something for hip extension as well. So I don't really have like a measurable, let's say 180 degrees, of a hip opening angle for this. It's not like I don't want to go down the front split route with it, but I want them to be able to like comfortably lunge without feeling like their back leg's going to fall off. Yeah.
Nice. Okay. How many clients have lost a back leg?
So far, none. So we're doing good.
Looking well then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the hands to floor pike is a pretty good one for most people, whether they want to work towards pike or not. Just having that
Yeah.
basic level of forward fold flexibility. It's good for RDLs. It's good for deadlifts, all that hinging movement. Yeah, what about shoulders? Like, are you doing much in terms of like shoulder flexion extension work with clients, or a base level there, or again, that's just dependent on what they're
Yeah,
training for, their goals?
just a bit like if somebody wants a handstand, we'll work on the shoulder flexion, but otherwise, um, it would generally just come with the training. If they're training towards chin ups and they're doing some type of overhead press movement, and we're probably going to have something in for the traps because they're not doing handstands, so we'll give them something like trap free raises every now and then. Like go down the Poliquin route. Their shoulder flexibility is usually at an acceptable level for the average person, for the average
Yeah,
lifestyle.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I don't
yeah,
know whether it's true with you, but I sort of find with clients, when they're training a lot of that basic stuff, so they're training press, they're training push-ups, they're doing rows and they're doing chin-ups and all that sort of stuff. If they're missing range of motion, it sort of starts to appear through pain or injury. And then we start to go, okay, well, we've got to work on your shoulder flexibility here. Maybe it's shoulder flexion, maybe it's external rotation, maybe it's internal rotation. But the way I start to present more sort of flexibility goals to my clients is usually through the fact that they're like, oh, I've got an injury or my shoulders are starting to hurt. I'm like, well, we really need to work on some of this stuff. I do have a few tests that I get clients to do related to their sort of shoulder flexibility. Usually against a wall, shoulder flexion, stand back to the wall, push your lower back flat into the wall. What is the shoulder flexion range of motion you have? Can you do, I think they call them wall angels, don't they? Where you do the external rotation, back of the hands to the wall, slide the hands up and down the wall. And it's sort of a good scale to see if pecs or lats and stuff are tight. So I often do that with clients when they start to
yeah,
talk to me about shoulder pain or discomfort there. Yeah.
yeah. It's one of those things where like those tests, you'll find a lot of people that fail all of those tests and they won't be in pain. Um, so we can't basically expect like everyone to be able to pass them all. But when we're looking at certain athletic standards, like you're trying to pull and push above your head, then you're going to need some decent range and access to that range, uh, passively or actively as well. Uh, but yeah, if it again, it's like quite client driven, and like you said, if someone's in pain, cool, we can approach stuff. We
Just to sum up on basics, like yeah, having good strength and the ability to be able to do a certain amount of reps in dips and chins and pull ups and all that sort of stuff is a great foundation. And I think it's a common movement. The next sort of step is people want to unlock the muscle up, and yeah, if you've got a certain amount of ring dips and you've got a certain amount of whether it's weighted pull ups or you've got your false grip, pull ups on the rings, it is sort of the next step, isn't it? And like you sort of say, these more advanced movements, they generally require, a little bit more flexibility, a little bit more strength, a little bit more technique. There's more sort of skill involved. And it's interesting when you try to break them down. I think you and I, both as a coach, we look at, okay, well, what is the muscle up? What does it consist of? Each of these sort of elements, and how do we break it down? And we do that with every movement. Like it could be a press to handstand, it could be a back roll, it could be a handstand push up. Or what are the elements that equal this movement, and how can I break that down so that we can start to work on the individual elements and start to bring them together so that the client can achieve, the the complex movement or the more advanced sort of movement. But yeah, the muscle up is definitely a common one for a lot of people, and I think it's something that's very achievable for most people. In your experience, mate, like, what have you found with your clients, and how would you go about talking about the muscle up in terms of a complex skill?
Yeah, like the reverse engineering sort of approach that you pretty much outlined there. I think we've got used to doing that now, especially as coming into like the later years of our coaching or the current years of our coaching. At the beginning, maybe we weren't doing that quite as much. Uh, the muscle up, the progressions. So, I mean, because we've been in this game for a while, and we know that there's like almost a prerequisite in terms of how much strength you need for your dips and your chins, and how much range you need. So, as long as people are around like the 5 full range dip level and 5 full range like false grip chin up level, the muscle up is generally there. It's like the other, but this is where it gets a bit more complicated, and other factors come into it, like their skin tolerance on the false grip. Can they hold the discomfort in their wrists while doing the transition? the transition itself. Can they perform the transition? What does the negative look like? Do they drop through it, or can they control through it? And then, depending on these things, will kind of depend where we need to focus more of our time to basically complete the set. Because usually strength is no longer an issue once you have, like, the 5 full range dips and chins. It's something else that's kind of like missing or happening.
Yeah, I'd agree with you there. I like the muscle up in a sense of it's really one of those sort of first introductions to, turning a pull into a press, or on the way down, it's turning the pressing motion into a pulling motion, so that the transition is the transition of the line of force, from the pull to the push, and the eccentric the other way around, which is a really sort of cool thing for a lot of people to learn, because before that we haven't really experienced that in a lot of the basic movements. We talked about this earlier, like, the overhead press, the push up, the horizontal row, you pull ups, whatever you want to say, they're very much a single sort of plane of motion, a single sort of force that we're using. And then we start to learn this thing with the muscle up. It's about this transition and being able to control the change in the muscle tension from a pushing to a pulling sort of motion. And your ability to do that, like you sort of talk about in that transition, do you just fall through that, or do you understand how to work that? So, what was your first muscle up like, mate? When you reflect back on it, like, where were you doing your first muscle up, and what would you say the quality of that was?
Yeah, I don't think the quality was that great. Um, but this is the thing, I never had video of it, so I can't like refer back to it too well. But I remember the first time I learned muscle up, I was actually quite young. I was about 16. I think I was either 15 or 16, and I was training out of a gymnasium in London. I used to go there with my friend to practice some like parkour things. We were just like uh, train on the crash mats. So we'd practice our front flips and back flips on these crash mats, or front somersaults, back somersaults. But then it was like a supervised adults gymnastics session. Basically, you do your own thing, but there is a guy there, and he showed me the gymnastic rings. He was like, "Hey, why don't you try and muscle up?" I was like, "What's a muscle up?" He's like, "You just hold on to the rings, pull yourself up, and get over." And I remember trying like a few times. I was like, I've got no idea what I'm doing here or how to do it. And I think he showed me the negative. But it was one of those things where I was like, I think where I was quite young and I'd already developed some chin ups and dips, and I didn't really care about the pain or the skin ripping on my wrists. I just got it in a matter of a few weeks by just trying, if that makes sense, which isn't everyone's approach now, or how reality is for most people now. But I remember within a few weeks, I was able to like pull up, get over the rings, and then pull back down. But I remember him sort of like giving me the cues of, all right, you got to pull it tight to your chest. He's like, don't let the elbows come out, pull it in, keep the elbows in, and then get over the rings and then push up. And just through like sheer willpower and determination, I managed to managed to make it happen.
Yeah, nice, mate. Nice. I think mine was like in part of one of the CrossFit games, CrossFit Open workouts or something. It was the first time I got a muscle up, but the form would have been terrible. I think my arms were bent at the bottom. It was probably a kip.
Yeah,
I was excited to get it, but a part of me was frustrated about it because I'm a bit of a stiffler for technique. And then after that, I was like, I got to learn how to do this strict. So, yeah, that's where it sort of started. But I do remember when I got my first, or when I was training bar muscle ups for the first time. So I used to train at the bar muscle ups in the gym. And for a while there, we were training some of the British athletics team. So we had a few of their 100, 200 meter sprinters, and we had a few of, like, we had one guy that was their decathlete. And I was busy training muscle ups and maybe getting one or two bar muscle ups out. And he walks into the gym ready, coming in for his training session. He's like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm just doing bar muscle ups." He's like, "Oh, can I have a go?" I'm like, "Have you ever done them before?" He's like, "Nah, but they look all right." And this guy, because he's just such an athlete, he just, oh, that's like this. And he just starts doing them. And he just like, and they're clean. They're not terrible reps. They're actually really clean. And he does like 10. And I'm like, I hate you. So some people just have that,
uh,
mate. And he was just one of those dudes that which had it.
see, we're doing it wrong, mate. We're doing it wrong. These guys are unlocking the skills and they're not even working for them. So there must be a hidden story in there somewhere.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's it. Yeah. Um, it's interesting. Do you ever do weighted muscle ups? And what are your thoughts on weighted muscle ups?
I did.
Mm.
Never on the bar because my bar muscle up was never good enough to justify putting some weight on it. But I did try some weighted ring muscle ups. Actually, for the first time, I had one of my students on weighted ring muscle ups for a whole phase, uh, just to like not clean it up, but to like just build in a bit more capacity for some ring routines going ahead. It was tough on the transition. Like the pull up wasn't the problem. I remember I built it to, I think 20 kilos was my max for one rep. The pull wasn't a problem, but getting around that transition with that 20 kilos was tough. And then again, yeah, the dip wasn't a big deal. It was just that transition, which just felt very sticky. But whether it helped me for anything else going forward, I'm not too sure because I didn't train it properly.
Yeah.
Whereas with Alex, we put it into his program as a way to help prepare for the ring routines, and I feel like it made a good difference in terms of just giving him a bit of a larger engine and a bit more bulk. He definitely grew quite well that phase as well. And something I've always noticed with ring muscle ups is you put time into them in terms of like getting close to fatigue, your shoulders will just grow.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And they're good conditioning for the elbows too. But I think you've got to have a
yeah,
certain level of elbow strength before you start doing too many of them. So
yeah,
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I'm like, I understand maybe guys doing weighted. I understand weighted bar muscle ups, but the ring ones, I don't know, they've always been in the back of my mind as a bit dangerous. I just think that it could go wrong. So risk to reward ratio, what's that like? And I remember working with Lee Wade Turner. So Lee Wade Turner is a calisthenics king. He's an absolute beast. And he was training for the world record ring muscle ups. And when he first started, he was in our gym and he was doing weighted muscle ups, and he hurt his wrist. And I'm like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you can't afford to hurt yourself if you're trying to go for this record and stuff like that. And I was talking to him about it. I'm like, mate, why don't you do weighted pull-ups, your heavy weighted pull-ups, and then just drop the weight off and then just go straight over and do your ring muscle-ups. So use the weighted pull-ups to activate more of the motor muscle units and, recruit more muscle fibers. And then the muscle-ups are going to feel easier, and you'll get the benefits from using weights in your pulls or weights in your dips if you want to do it that way. And then you'll lower the chances of hurting yourself. So in the back of my mind, I've always got the idea of him hurting himself, so I'm a bit careful with that sort of stuff on the rings. And it's interesting because I like the basics. When we go to the basics, we do weighted dips and we do weighted chins and we do weighted overhead press, and we can really use weight on a lot of these simple movements. But when it comes to these big compound, more complicated movements, like how often do we load these? I mean, I do see dudes doing weighted handstand push-ups with weight vests and stuff like that, but I don't know. What do you think?
I do think the risk increases when you're loading more complex movements. Yes. Um, Probably because there's an element of compensation while you're doing the complex movements. So sometimes when somebody's unlocked one of these movements, there will be an element of compensation there. They've unlocked it because they've actually skipped the first 20% of the transition and they've just like had a slightly higher pull to get over it, if that makes sense. Or they've skipped that first 20% of shoulder extension because they've had a slightly higher pull or stronger transition. So then when you load it, you're now being exposed to territories that you can not only can you no longer skip them, but you haven't trained them unloaded. So it's like it's a double whammy. It's like you're in this new range that you've never been in or never been in with control, but also with an added extra 5, 10, 15% body weight. So I think that's where sometimes the risks can apply. Um, I'm not really one for loading complex movements anyway. Not that, but like I said, Alex was my first. I gave muscle ups to, but he's also someone that could probably do 6+ ring muscle ups, no problem, body weight for multiple sets.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
we weren't really hitting like failure, put it that way. Um, I think it's also one of those things where if you can load it and you can do it well, then you could probably get a big reward out of it. But is there a risk? Maybe. Yeah,
Mm.
you'll have to be a bit careful with how you perform in it.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't really put too much thought into it. Like we see when we do weighted chins and weighted dips, like how that can assist the strength for, let's say, a muscle up or for other sort of movements. But then if we add weight to the muscle up, does that transfer to something else? That's maybe a way to look at it. Or does more volume of muscle ups transfer? Or slower eccentric muscle ups, slower concentric. I mean, there's a lot of variety we can obviously add, and it's a scope for something to think about. But yeah, risk reward is always in the back of my mind. Like, depending
I
on who I'm
think
working with. But
I
some
think you
people,
should try it next phase and
yeah,
just get
let's go,
swole.
mate. I'll just do some weighted muscle ups and see what happens. Get massive
Yeah.
shoulders. Let's move forward, mate. Let's start to talk about some other, some of these more advanced sort of gymnastics movements. What's one that sticks in your mind that took you a little while to unlock? And let's maybe break it down and talk about how you went about it.
Yeah. So I think in my earlier days of training, the back roll on the gymnastic rings was one of those movements where I couldn't do when I first tried it, and I had to do stuff to achieve it. Whereas, like, let's say, like a chin up, I just had to do the chin ups to achieve it. Dips, I just had to do dips to achieve them. The muscle up, from my experience, I just had to do muscle ups to achieve it. I'm not saying that's always the case, but for me it was. Whereas my first thing where I was like, oh, I can't just do this thing, or I can't achieve this thing just by practicing it, I have to do extra, was the back roll. And I basically had to get the push in stronger for it, and also my pull also had got like to another level before I could achieve the back roll. But the push got stronger in terms of a new form. So I went from doing normal ring dips to doing RTO ring dips, and once I could, I think it was once I had 3 to 5 sets of 5 on full RTO ring dips, was also roughly the same time I had about 4 to 5 archer chin ups. And then the phase after that, my coach had me on band assisted back rolls. I had already tried.
Sorry, man, just to
Sorry.
jump in. Before you go down that line, I think in a lot of people's mind, when you say RTO dips, they're thinking that
Uh,
you're dipping down at the bottom and then you're pressing and RTOing at the top. But what you're talking about is a bit different. Do you want to define that RTO dip just a little bit more?
yeah, good shout. Sorry about that. So with the dip, a full RTO dip, you would start with the rings turned out, so your both of your palms supinated facing forward, and then you'd perform the dip as normal to your normal range. You can usually get a little bit lower this way, but the hands stay supinated the whole time, so the palms stay facing forward the whole time. And then the idea is you want to try and press out of that as well. Basically, it takes an element of the tricep out of it and starts to put a lot more load through the pec and delts, and even on the biceps actually at some stages of the movement. So it just makes the dip a lot heavier and a lot less tricep dominant, which just means other muscles have to work harder to get you to perform the motion. So that's the RTO dip, and I remember I had sets of 5 of them for multiple sets, as well as the archer chin ups. So I went through like I think a couple of phases where I was just getting a lot stronger on those on the overhead pull-in, like the archer chins and the dips, RTO dips, and then the phase after that, coach had me on band assisted back rolls. Now I already knew what the back roll was because I tried it a few months prior to this, before I'd built the strength in the RTO dips and the archer chins. I tried it, I think, in some workshops and with some friends, and I just couldn't do it. It was really messy. I was trying my best to get over these rings, and I had the false grip, but I couldn't really do much else. But then after those arches and RTO dips, I did the band assisted, and I think it was either week 2 or week 3 after using the band, I unlocked the full clean back roll. Uh, it took me by surprise. I was like, oh wow, this is actually a really strong back roll. I wasn't expecting it, but then like in hindsight, it's because some of those basics were there, and basically the band just helped me understand the orientation and the skill element of it. I could already front roll, I could shoulder stand on the rings. I wasn't really working hollow back presses at this stage, but I could do those things. Yeah, so the band just helped me unlock that last element.
Yeah, awesome. Do you want to define that back roll with the band just a little bit? Like talk us through that, what that looks like?
So imagine you're in a top support position on the rings, but you have a band fixed under each hand on the ring, so that the band runs through the rings, but you're holding the band on one side and holding it on the other side on the rings. So then you've got a bit like a tense band in between both rings. And then what you do is you'd come into your dip, and then you'd initiate the back roll, but the band helps keep the rings together. And as you come over, the band will also catch you. So if you don't manage to stay high enough to keep the hips high enough over the rings, and you fall in between the rings, you'll get caught on the band, and it turns into what do they call it? A bar rollover?
Pullover, I think it's usually called.
Pullover.
Yeah,
Sorry,
a bar
it's been
pullover.
so
Yeah.
long. Yeah, so it basically turns into a bar pullover, but on the rings with a band. It's pretty much the same thing. And the idea is you want to keep practicing that until you don't really feel the band anymore. Once you're no longer being caught by the band, it means you're staying high enough. So in theory, with a bit of speed, you should be able to unlock the back roll. Um, yeah, that's what it looked like.
Yeah, nice man. Yeah, I find the bar pullovers are a real nutcracker, if you know what I mean. Whereas the banded back rolls, not so much a nutcracker.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The,
It's funny, man,
if you
because I initially when I started playing around with back rolls, like I didn't get it for a long time. I only probably got my back roll this year, and I went through that phase of trying the band stuff, and the band's really good because it does, like you said, it teaches you to get your hips up and over the rings. But I never got to the stage where I could do the back roll, and maybe that was something missing. I wasn't doing RTO dips. I wasn't training that really sort of strong shoulder forward position, having that ability to feel comfortable in the catch, I suppose. So I didn't really get it. But then when I've gone about training the back roll now, I actually haven't done any banded back rolls. I did more of this sort of kipping stuff, so different sort of inverted kip to support, where you start upside down in the rings, you sort of fold into an L sit. So you're upside down in this sort of pie position, and then you open the hips as fast as you can and pull at the same time, and then you land in the ring support position. It's a forward roll, but it's teaching you the kip, and that's what we were using that sort of for. And then the next step for me was to actually go from like an L sit sitting on the floor. So I'm sitting on the floor, I've got a false grip in the rings, my arms are slightly bent, but then it's sort of like I'm rolling back so that I'm in sort of like maybe an L sit front lever and doing a front lever row. So pulling up and then keeping up and over the rings. And I had a box behind me with like yoga mats on it. And I would land in like in a bottom of the push up position. So starting in the L sit, going up and over, kipping and landing in the push up, and then pressing to the top of the push up and coming back down. And that was just teaching me the roll. And then I did back rolls, but it was a back roll to stand. So instead of going back roll and catching it in support, the idea was just to do a back roll and then just land on your feet on the ground. So you didn't actually have to catch the support position. And then after that, that's when I got my back roll because I started doing it just from the dip position, coming down in the dip and opening it up. So different strokes for different folks. Probably could have learned it that way that you did it as well, like the RTO dips and then the banded sort of stuff. But I think there are different progressions. But when we break it down, I think the components that equal the back roll um, are very similar, and the way we trained it was probably just ticking off those sort of components. You mentioned false grip there. You mentioned the RTO, training the anterior side of the shoulder, training the biceps. It's probably strengthening the elbows. It's getting the hips up and over the rings, like all of these sort of key elements. Is there anything I've missed, or is there anything you'd like to add around the back roll stuff?
So the back roll is one of those moves where you can bypass it through speed and technique. Uh, but if the strength isn't there, you'll never have it slow. It's like you'll never be able to control your way around without basically kipping or speeding through it if you don't have the strength through that RTO range or through the deep RTO range. So that's something that kind of needs to be developed so you can basically not have to rely on being as perfect timing with the kipping and things like that. Because yeah, you can definitely learn it through just having the technique like spectacular. But everything needs to be timed precisely, like the opening of the hips and like you were saying the front lever pull, etc., and things like this. They all need to be timed at the exact right elements, and you
Yes.
will get that back roll. But if you can get the RTO really strong, then you don't need to be basically as efficient with the timing, and you can just like hold on to and apply enough pressure through the rings while rotating around it. But yeah, I think we didn't speak about the front roll because generally you'd learn the front roll before the back roll. But one of the new things about the back roll is there's now a rotation around an axis. So your head is now rotating through space, and you're not really too sure on where you are. And this is like another variable that makes some bodyweight skills a lot more complicated because you're no longer just like pulling or pushing in just one plane. You're now rotating around a certain axis, and now your vestibular system basically is getting worked out as well. So there has to be like an element of vestibular system adaptation before it becomes comfortable. So if you're someone that's not used to doing back somersaults or front somersaults, or if you're someone that's not used to doing just even roly-polies, especially backwards roly-polies, then that's another variable that would need to be trained for the back roll to be possible. Yeah.
I feel like backwards somersault, but roly poly, I've not heard of that one.
Forward, it's like a forward roll on the floor. What do you guys call it in like
I like
Australian
it.
schools when you just like
A roly poly.
just
I like
just yeah.
it. Yeah, I get what you mean. It's sort of like the first time you start to learn a handstand. Like the first time you're upside
Yeah.
down on your hands and someone goes posteriorly tilt your pelvis and you're like, fucking what? Where
Yeah.
am I? You're like, I got no idea what's going on. So I think, when you start to do some of these more sort of complex movements, it's that spatial awareness of like, far out, what's going on? And especially in something like the back roll, when you're first learning it and maybe it is fast, it's like, wow, everything's got to be in sync. I've got to pull and kip and catch, and you don't have a chance to fuck it up. Like I think, in your overhead press, if the barbell comes down out of place and you can catch it and readjust it and then get ready for your next press, that's sort of fine. But in something like this, it's just so dynamic, and just playing with it and getting the timing is something that it's a skill in itself. I think, like
Yeah.
understanding that stuff. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think like when I look at it now, the way that you sort of learn it, like if I was to break that down even further about like, that RTO stuff, like you've got full RTO push-ups. You could spend time in the bottom of an RTO push-up. You could spend time in the bottom of an RTO dip. You can start to work, obviously, your RTO dips. There's so many different ways we can go from some of the basic stuff to, this more advanced RTO dip, and then taking that RTO dip into obviously movements such as like the back roll. Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed with you there. Yeah, I used to do RTO push-up holds in like the bottom bent arm position, and I would do it with the legs slightly straddled, and then sort of like progress the legs together. Obviously, the closer the legs are together, the closer you're gonna have to hold the rings to your hips as a way to counter the weight of the legs. But it's a really nice way to start understanding how to hold and generate tension in that position, because you're going to need to pass through that in the back roll at some point.
Mm. Would you say pelican curls, or would you not go that far?
You don't need it. Like you can. I think you can do it as a safety net, because the stronger you are in the pelican curl, the less likely you are to fuck up your elbow if you misplace a back roll and if you like fall through the rings. Like I've done that a couple of times.
Mm.
So pelican curls can be useful as like basically some insurance, but I don't think they're needed to actually develop the back roll. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. For those who don't know a pelican curl, it's sort of like you come to the bottom, or imagine you're in the bottom of your ring push up position. Now, the rings are a little bit further elevated. You're not sort of right down having the rings just above the floor, because what you're going to do is from that bottom of the push up position, you start to extend the elbows. So you're going to go forward and lower than that. So the arms go back behind you, and then you pull yourself back up to the bottom of the push up position. Some people add a press up in there as well, but basically the pelican curl is that bicep curl with the arms behind you or in that extended sort of position. Very intense on the elbow joint, and not something I'd say for beginners. You want to better progress towards that, but it's got similar characteristics to the back roll. But like Ernie says, it's more about a safety net. If you would have not quite catch the back roll and you would have fall out of that position, maybe it'd give you the strength not to pull your arm out of your socket or something like
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the pelican curls are cool. They're basically the body weight variation of the incline bicep curl, like with dumbbells, but they're
that.
the body weight variation of that. Yeah, I
Yeah, except
remember
for
when we
they're
used to
not a
train
body
them, and
weight.
yeah,
They're not body weight. Or a big
stupid
chunky
amounts
one.
heavier. Do you remember when we used to train loads of them in the park? I miss our
Uh,
pelican curl sessions. They were
yeah,
good.
exactly, mate. I couldn't straighten my arms for days.
Nice.
I think that's why we enjoyed it so much, because it was just like the bicep DOMs that you have after that. It's just like
Yeah,
feels like you're gonna get massive arms.
exactly. Like having DOMs by yourself is kind of lonely, but then when you get to share that suffering, it's acceptable.
Yeah. But let's move into another one, mate. Maybe a common one.
Yeah.
That's this sort of complex movements that we're talking about. We're going to talk about sort of like the press to handstand. Um, I'll leave you the floor, mate. What do you want to tell us about
Yeah,
learning the press to handstand, or maybe share your
yeah.
story? How did you go about learning the press to handstand?
So the press starts getting a lot more complicated than things like the back row. But depending on it doesn't have as much of like the vestibular system involved in terms of our head like changing around space. Because generally with a press, the head will stay where it is, and also the handstand by that point is so well trained that you kind of know what you're pushing into. Uh, but what really fucks people up with the press or makes it a bit more complicated is where you're supposed to contract and then how that's supposed to change throughout the movement. So for me, the press was so tough. I remember Emma trained me through the press, my coach, Emma Louis, and I remember just complaining to him before I had it, saying, "Hey, I don't think I'll ever get this press. Like, I couldn't press walk." So, press walk is when you put your hands on. It's one of the claimed progressions for the press to handstand. It's when have the hands on the floor, imagine like a pike fold, and then you lift feet up like an inch and you let them float forward closer to the hands. This is what we call a press walk. I had zero on press walks. I couldn't do them, couldn't lift. I just didn't have that strength in the shoulders or the traps or the upper body or whatever you want to call it to support my weight in underbalance. So support any weight that low, so my feet that far low to the floor while my hips remained high. Uh, and my pancake was okay. Like I didn't have a full pancake, but my pancake was okay. It wasn't bad. I had like elbows to the floor relatively comfortably, and my pike wasn't too bad either. I could get head to shins if I sort of forced it. But then my main missing points were understanding what needs to compress in terms of how pulling the hip flexors closer to the torso while in that sort of like beginning press the handstand position, and also just the strength to hold the weight in the shoulders. So for me, it was a lot of like end range compression drills, and we did a lot of this indirectly with things like the back to wall press handstand. So this is when you've got your hands on the floor, but you've got the wall just in front of you there, and you lean your upper back into the wall. You use the wall to support your weight, and then you bring your legs up into a press to handstand. So you're basically doing like a spotted press to handstand, but the wall is your spotter. This really helped me understand how to use the hip flexors at the bottom of the range. And then the strength development for it, this came through lots of tucks, lots of pike handstands. So tuck handstands, pike handstands, because both of these train the underbalance or the weight in underbalance, and also lots of eccentrics, but very specific to the bottom of that range. So I had to do lots of chest to wall eccentrics, and that was one of the key things that helped me build the strength to then unlock the press. But yeah, the press for me was a nightmare. I hated it. Um, it was just not. It was one of those things where I just wasn't naturally good at. Or things like the back roll, I was quite good at pulling, and I quite enjoyed dips on the rings. So it wasn't like a too tough of a process or something that I hated. Whereas the press to handstand, it was all the things that I didn't like, which was straight arm pushing strength and lower body abdominal compression, but like to max range.
It's funny, mate, because your story and my story are probably the opposite.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But you covered a lot there. It's like the core compression strength, like being able to close that angle between the torso and the legs. We're talking like forward fold, that pike flexibility, and then it's that hamstring flexibility, like being able to keep the legs, as close to straight as possible, ideally straight. And then you're talking about upper body strength. We're talking about the shoulder strength, being able to support the body weight so you can press into the handstand. And it's like you say, understanding the movement, like where does that movement even come from? Like once the feet float off the floor, well, fuck, then what? Like it's like you're just like, hang on, where am I going here? And I think it's like, it's like the back roll in a sense that you sort of mentioned. You can just sort of fly through it and not really break the movement down or have any control or awareness of the movement, where you can start to slow it down and be really focusing on, okay, well, what needs to happen here? What's the first step? What's the second step? How do we unpack this movement? Yeah, it's interesting that you use the back to wall press. Like when I first started doing press handstand, I used the back to wall press, but there's pros and cons to that exercise, like there is anything. But I think the reason you were using it, like to understand that core compression and take balance out of the picture. It's like, well, balance is this big obstacle that's going to get in the way and stop you from being able to practice this sort of compression technique and understanding that. But if you could take balance out of it, well, then it allows you to stay more focused, build that understanding, and then bring balance back into it, which is an interesting factor with a lot of sort of complex skills. When we think about all of the handstand stuff or all these things, it's like, well, what elements are in there? There's the balance, there's the strength, there's the flexibility, there's the understanding of the movement, the sequencing. There's so many things going on, and if you're just trying to practice the movement, like, geez, you've got a lot to think about. But if we can strip away like a couple of those things or one of those things, the the CPU or the capacity to try and think about everything just takes this massive sort of step back. And then once you train it and get better at it, like that now becomes like an automatic program. It's like if you don't know how to squat and eventually learn how to squat, well, then you don't really need to think about squatting. You just squat. That's good. But someone who's never squatted before, like teaching them to squat, like it feels so foreign and so uncomfortable. So it's just like being able to get good at that movement and understand those components step by step. Yeah, but my first press was just ugly, and it was the sense of I had no flexibility. You talked about nearly having a pancake. Geez, I don't even think I could bend past 90 degrees in the pancake. I was using a slider, so I'd start in like a press up position, and I'd have my feet on a slider. So then I'd just do this pike slide, so lifting the hips up, dragging the feet in towards my hands. But obviously that starts to create a little bit of momentum. So the momentum that created allowed me to get my feet off the ground. But as soon as my feet lifted off the ground, my knees were just bent, and I don't have great hip adductor flexibility. So my legs are out a long way, and the only way to counterbalance that was to planche, like to lean forward a long way. But I think that's one thing that I had in my favor. I just had strong shoulders, so I just muscled my way through the press to handstand, but it didn't have the flexibility and just couldn't clean up the technique until I had to take a step back and go, you know what, I've got to actually start training some of this flexibility stuff. Otherwise, my press is always just going to look ugly.
Yeah, yeah. I think I remember your first press. I'm pretty sure you got the press in Momentum, didn't you? Like back in London.
No, the first time I got the press was actually when I left London and I was traveling back to Australia, and I did a trip through Asia, and I was actually in Bali at the time at Nirvana Strength, and I was doing some coaching and muck around there with the owners. And then it was just one day I was practicing the press. I've got the video. I've still got it.
Okay,
When I look
I'm
back,
trying
I
to.
really I just shake my head.
Maybe it was the elevated presses then you were doing in
Yeah,
Momentum.
I had the elevated presses, so feet elevated on a box and doing those.
Yeah.
That was
Okay.
a big part of it. So,
So that was
um,
before you left London. That was when was that?
yeah,
20. I can't remember. Like
2018
20.
is when 2018 is when
Okay.
I left London. Yeah, so
2018, yeah. So that was 5 years ago. That's when I remember because I was really far from any of that at that point. But I remember watching you and being like, "Oh wow, I don't know how he's got the strength for this." But I also didn't have the understanding to be like, "Okay, it's a planchy press." For me, it was just press as a press.
mm,
Um, but yeah, that makes sense because you are quite strong on the front delt sort of area. Versus, and back then, yeah, your pancake was not really a pancake.
incredible. Yeah, yeah. What are some key elements now? Like when you think about a client comes to you and they want to learn press to handstand, like what naturally goes through your head is, okay, how am I going to break this down and build a
Yeah.
client to that capacity?
Okay. Can they balance first? So I need to know if they can handstand. Um, if they can balance, great. Can they tuck, deep tuck handstand? Because this is going to tell me if they can hold the weight in their shoulders where they need to, and if they can elevate the shoulders hard enough for the press as well. If they can deep tuck, then perfect. We're already over halfway there. If they can't, then that's an area that we need to train. And then I need to see what does the movement look like. Do they know how to organize their body so that with their straddled legs, they can roll down and pull the legs towards the body while holding a bit of their weight. So things like the back to wall eccentrics is a really nice way to see if this is possible for the person, or freestanding eccentrics. So basically what we need to see is first of all, can the legs get to roughly parallel? And then when they do, what happens? Do the shoulders just like plunge straight away? Or can you see that there's a slight effort to hold the shoulders in place while pulling the legs to the torso. Because if they have that, then again, it means they sort of understand the skill element. Whereas if they don't, then it means we need to teach them how to roll while holding weight, or how to roll the spine, but while holding weight in the shoulders. And then I look at flexibility as well. So for the flexibility, I want to see what is their active straddle compression. How deep is their active straddle compression, or how high can they lift the legs in a straddle compression? So if you sit on the floor in a straddle position, you got either hand, or you got your hands on either side of one knee. How high can you lift that leg? Can you lift it towards the torso? Does it even lift off the floor? If it doesn't, we've got a lot of work to do there. If you can lift it off, then great. I think we're usually looking, I think I figured it out. I need it to be um, the angle where you can keep an active straddle compression for most of my students was about, I think it was 50 degrees or less. So the angle between the torso and the leg has to be about 50 degrees or less. That's what I worked it out to with all of the students I analyzed who had straddle compressions when they unlocked their presses. Uh, if they don't have straddle compression, then they need planche, which is what your situation was.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, when you compare the two there, like, you've got someone who's quite flexible and can get that deep sort of pancake, pike, forward fold, whatever you want to call it. They don't necessarily need the same level of strength to do the press to handstand. But if you don't have that capacity to get that flexible, then you need a lot more strength because you are going to sort of start to planche and lean the shoulders forward. And it's interesting because as I've become more flexible, like the more I've worked on my flexibility, um, geez, the press to handstand has just felt so much lighter because before when I'm planching and leaning forward, because my compression is so bad, I'm actually lifting I'm lifting my whole body weight, or I'm lifting a big percentage of my body weight in that press. But as I get more flexible and I have the ability to stack the hips more over the shoulders or more over the wrists, it's very much now like I feel a new sensation of just being able to tilt the pelvis to lift the legs. So instead of lifting the whole body, all I'm doing is tilting the pelvis and lifting the legs, and it's just so much lighter than
Yeah.
before. And that would never have happened if I hadn't started to think about, okay, break the movement down. What do I need to do here to take the weight off the shoulders? I need to get flexible. I've got to get more compression strength, and I've got to get more hamstring flexibility. And I still need to get a lot of adductor flexibility because my legs don't go out to the side. They still go forward a long way, which doesn't help me in the press. But it's an interesting way just to look at the movement and just sort of think about it. Is the client someone who's strong but not flexible, or is the client someone who's flexible, not strong? And what components do we need to work on to help this individual get that press to handstand if that's the goal? Because it's not necessarily like if you're super flexible and you're pressing to handstand, it doesn't necessarily mean you need to get stronger. Like you might not need that strength. You just got to get a better awareness of the movement. Or like you said, maybe they've got to just do more tucks to build a little bit more strength. And maybe the same if you're super strong and you want to planche to press the handstand, well, maybe you've just got to get stronger for that. But it's up to the individual of how they want that press to look, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. Um, yeah, it's strength, skill, and flexibility. It's one of those movements that gets more complicated because it just has more variables to the game. And then also like the change in the forces as well, which is quite an interesting one for the press. Because with the press, you have to start with maintaining compression in the hip flexors. So at the bottom of the press, you basically you have to be able to lift the feet off the floor, but while you maintain compression at the hips until you can open the shoulders enough to sort of like get the hips above the wrists, and then you can start to decompress. So it's like you need compression, but then you also need to know when you need to start inverting that compression into a hip opener force instead. So it's like there's a lot of forces that are happening, and then you've also got the elevation of the shoulder that's happening while you're compressing, and then you've got the flexing of the shoulder that's happening while you're compressing, and then it all changes. Then you stop compressing, and you have to stop flexing quite as hard, and you just have to start bringing the movement up sort of from the hips. Yeah, there's a lot of components to it, and it's why it frustrates a lot of people, including myself.
Like I say, it's just the sequence, isn't it? Like there's so many things, so many elements
Yeah,
to tick off. You've got to have the balance in the handstand. You've got to have the strength in the shoulders. You've got to have the understanding of where to pull from, where to push from. When that force changes directions from a pull to a push, yeah, there is just so much sort of going on. You mentioned the back to wall drill, or you mentioned the wall facing drill. Can you talk us through that a little bit, and maybe why you think that was such a key part for you in terms of your press
yeah,
and handstand?
yeah. So if we just look at the theory of strengthening angles, um, we know that if we hold isometrics at certain angles, we will get that angle stronger, right? So if you're trying to get your push-up stronger, but you're really weak at the bottom, you can do like some bottom push-up holds, and generally that'll get you stronger. Now with the press, whereas the weakest point for most people, or at least for me, but for most people too, is when your feet are trying to come off of the floor to a level where you can then just like do a straddle up, basically, like just have the legs straddled and just lift the legs up and up into straight. But it's usually that like first 0 to 45 degrees or so that's really heavy, in terms of the feet being on the floor, from the floor to coming off the floor about 45 degrees. So I was like, how do I train this? Actually, Emmett never gave me this drill. I included this one myself, and it made a big difference. I was like, how do I train that part? Like, how do I segment just that element of the movement? So what I did is I got into a chest to wall handstand. I came down into a straddle, but I kept my feet on the wall because I didn't want balance to be a problem, and I didn't really want to. I didn't want to train the top of the movement because I know I'm already strong there. Remember, I'm trying to train the bottom 40 degrees. So from the chest to wall straddle handstand, I would then try and like recruit as much tension as I could in my upper back and my traps, and then I would start to actively pull my legs off the wall and towards my hands. And I did this from a few different heights. I did it at 90 degrees, and I did it a bit lower, like off of a bench as well. And I was like, can I slow this point down where I'm pulling my legs down to my hands, while holding weight in the hands? I wanted to take out as much of the because normally when you're doing that, you would do it from, let's say, a freestanding press the hand, eccentric press the handstand. You would eventually get to that point of the movement. But to get there, you first have to kick up. You have to catch a kick up. You have to straighten up to straight. You have to catch there, and then you have to open into straddle. You have to start to lower down from the straddle. By the time you get to that last point of the movement, you've already expended quite a lot of energy. So it's like, how do I just make this more isolated and condensed? I just want to train this part because I'm weak as fuck in this part of the movement. So that's what I started to do. And yeah, that made a big difference. That pretty much, I remember, I think it was like within 4 to 6 weeks of starting to do that, I unlocked the press. Yeah.
Yeah, nice, man. Yeah, it's a good drill. I think there's a lot to learn from, really sort of breaking that down. Like you sort of say, there's the energy use that you've got if you're trying to kick up and do an eccentric, press to handstand. And it's just like, how many reps are you going to fail in the session before you get a good rep? How much energy and time are you wasting with that when you can find a better movement or another movement that allows you to hone in on the piece you need? And then obviously start to make progress out of that without expending so much energy and probably causing so much frustration because there's nothing worse than having 10 sets of eccentric press handstand and having to do 30 because you just keep falling out. So yeah, it's quite a
Exactly.
tricky thing. Let's talk about eccentrics because, I think a lot of people we use the eccentrics. Like eccentrics in some of the basic movements, like someone that doesn't have a push up, we can work eccentric push ups. Someone that doesn't have a chin up, we can work eccentric chin ups. They're a really great way to build strength, and unlock some of those basic movements. But in my experience, like sometimes that doesn't necessarily carry over. Like for me, two movements that I trained a lot with eccentrics for the handstand push up, freestanding handstand push up and the one arm chin. And like I could do a 30-second eccentric handstand push up on P bars nice and deep, but I couldn't press one handstand push up. Or I could do 2 or 3 reps of an eccentric one arm chin up, with 10 seconds eccentric, but I still couldn't do a one arm chin up. I think that eccentric has its place. It's a really great tool for building the strength, maybe conditioning the joints, preparing the body for this. But in my experience, it didn't work for me to be able to unlock those movements. What have you found with that sort of stuff, mate?
Yeah, pretty much the same. Like everyone's go-to for learning a bodyweight movement is to do the negative. So, you can't do a muscle up, just do negatives. You can't do pull-ups, do negatives. And it can work if a lot of the prerequisites are already there. Very rarely you'll find people where they will just build the prerequisites by doing the eccentrics. But in most cases, for me especially, and quite a few people I've trained, just eccentrics on a movement isn't enough to build the base layers of strength that you need. It's more of eccentrics are a really nice way to organize the strength if you already have it. So if you already have all of the strength ish required, but you don't really know how to organize the contractions in the body to pull the movement off, then eccentrics can play a really nice part. But yeah, I had the same issue. Like I was doing 20-second handstand push-up eccentrics off the wall, and I was doing them for weeks, and I made zero gains. If anything, I think I got weaker in my overhead pushing by doing that. But I also did eccentric one-arm chins like you, and I got stronger. And I think it's because I had a different background in the one-arm chin versus having a different background in that handstand push-up. Basically, I had zero overhead pushing strength, whereas I had a lot of overhead pulling strength. So when it came to transitioning from doing 5 arch chin-ups, and I think I had a 50-kilo chin at that time as well, about 80-kilo body weight. When it came to transitioning from that to eccentric one-arm chin, my one-arm chin actually did get a lot stronger. I got very close to it before injuring myself. But the handstand push-up, I had nothing. My piked push-ups were weak as shit. My feet elevated pike push-ups were almost non-existent as well. They weren't very good. So I was just training eccentrics on basically a noodle body, like a weak frame. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so what have you found? Like you've obviously got your handstand push-up now. What worked for
Yeah.
you? Did you drop eccentrics altogether? Did you keep them and add other stuff? Like what helped you get to the handstand push-up?
So Emmett got me to the handstand push-up, basically through quite a bit of concentric work, um, as well as some isometric work, and then eventually we did come back to eccentrics, where we were doing. I remember we were doing 3 eccentrics back to back, freestanding, but this was once I had already sort of established some good overhead pressing strength through. We didn't actually use the barbell. I'm not saying barbell use isn't good because I do use it with quite a few clients, but we didn't. We just used pike push-up variations. We used feet elevated pike push-up variations. We used chest to wall handstand push-ups and chest to wall partial range handstand push-ups as well. So I had to build the strength without the balance with those progressions I just mentioned, and then I had to build some specific angled strength. So he had me on bent arm handstand push-up isometric. So imagine you're in a crow, hands on the floor, knees are on your elbows, your head is not on the floor, and then you lift your knees up off of the elbows. So now it's just your hands on the floor and you're sort of like supporting yourself there in this bent arm tucked handstand push-up position. I was doing that to build strength there. And the thing that unlocked the handstand push-up for me was doing partial freestanding handstand push-ups. So imagine you're up in a handstand, you lower down into a handstand push-up, but you don't go all the way to the floor. You touch your head to an elevation, like some blocks, and then you push back up. This was a really frustrating skill because it was one of those things, as we mentioned, where balance plays such a key element that if you mess up your rep, like, or if you fall, you've messed up your rep, basically. So it's really hard to get like successful consecutive reps. But if you can, what it does is it teaches you how to express your strength that you do have through balance, lack of balance, or through your balance. So that was probably one of my biggest limitations because it got to the point where I could do chest to wall handstand push-ups for like quite a few reps, but I still can do a handstand push-up. And it's not because I didn't have the strength for it per se, it's because I didn't have the awareness of how to organize the strength in the balance.
Yeah, that's it. I like what you said there. There's a lot of good takeaway points. We've talked about stripping away certain elements. So balance was taken out there. Then you took out some range of motion, and you've built the strength there. But I also like the idea of eccentric, concentric, and isometric. And I think they're all very important things when it comes to unlocking a skill. because we can just work on eccentric, but it's not necessarily enough to get us to a point where we know how to apply that strength concentrically. So it's nice to be able to do eccentrics, but it's also nice to be able to find a variation or find a way to do concentrics. And it's also a great thing to be able to work that isometrics. You mentioned it before. Isometrics are a great way to build strength at a certain angle in the joint, plus or minus around about 10 degrees, they say, I think. So, being able to spend a bit of time in that crow position is probably like the weak point, of the handstand push-up. But it's also a contraction, isn't it? It's an isometric contraction. So coming at skills with these different focuses, and not just training the same thing week in, week out, face to face, has been something that's really helped with some of my skills as well, and also with clients, like just having that slightly different approach, not just bashing the eccentrics to death. Yeah, but the one arm chim's still eludes you, mate, just like it eludes me, eh?
Yeah, I haven't decided when I'll be returning back to that. It hasn't been too long that my elbows have been pain-free, so at the moment we're just like trying to continue to build some strength in the elbows and the pulling, but without going towards like heavy one-arm chin progressions. While we feel confident that the elbows will be able to handle it once we get back there. Yeah, but there's no rush, basically.
Yeah, yeah. No, exactly that, mate. Yeah, I'm the same. It's like it was a movement I wanted for ages, but then I just trained it for so long and got to this point where I plateaued with it, and it was just like, I'll put it on the bench now. I've just not gone back to it for a long time. But I'm just going through strength phase now, and it might be something that I do add back to my program in the future now with a better understanding of a different way maybe to approach it. I have had a few clients that have trained it and successfully got it, and I've applied different things to them, but I just haven't gone back and tried some of that stuff myself sometimes. So it'll be good
Yeah.
to explore, that sort of stuff as well. What's a skill you're working on right now, man? What's something that you're trying to work towards? It's one of these sort of more complex skills.
Ugh. So right now we've got the shoulder press. We haven't gone like super hard on it yet, but it is in the making, and it's basically me revisiting my press the handstand frustrations where I can't even see it on the horizon. Um, but coach is having to reassure me that it is.
Can you
Yeah,
just clear it up for those who don't know a shoulder press? What does it look like?
yeah. So the shoulder press is basically a larger range of motion of a press the handstand. So if you start in a straddle L sit, so you got your hands on the floor, your legs are on either side of the hands, and you press down into the floor and you lift your bum up off the floor and your legs come up as well. Now you're in a straddle L sit. Now the shoulder press is pressing from here into a handstand. So you need to have the strength to lift your hips up and over the shoulders from that position, and then to press out of it. So it's like a double press basically. They'll double press the handstand. It's a lot different to the press the handstand because your hips are now starting much lower than the shoulders, or much further behind than the shoulders. Whereas in a press the handstand, your hips start quite close to the wrists and the shoulders in terms of being in a stack. Now you don't have the stack, so basically you need to have the strength to push into the stack, and this is where your strength would come into play quite nicely. Um, as
Just
soon
not
as
my
you have,
flexibility.
yeah, not your flex. This is the issue. So
Our powers
it's
combined, mate. With our powers
yeah,
combined.
maybe. See, I'm actually struggling with the flexibility of the straddle L sit, and I say the flexibility, the strength of the hip compression in the straddle L sit right now is my biggest struggle. So holding, like I struggle to hold a fully parallel legs parallel to the ground straddle L sit. Normal L sit, no problem, but straddle L sit, I struggle to get it parallel. So that's one of the key elements we're working. We're also working things like tuck handstand eccentrics into tuck planche. I think you've done this before as well, haven't you? So what that does is that starts to get you stronger at the point where you can basically lift the hips up and over the shoulders, but you're doing the reverse motion. It's the eccentric, and provided you've done like enough some concentric work of overhead pressing from that planche sort of range, then it should help. It's one of those things for me right now where I'm doing it every week, but I don't feel much improvement. So I might need to revisit the books for that one and do some more concentric based work. But what else is in there? And I've also got some press float into stalled eccentric. So imagine you're starting to press the handstand, hands are on the floor. You're lifting the hips, and then you lift the feet up slightly, not too much, just like a couple inches, and then you take them out into a straddle, and then you lower through into the stalled. So again, we're like working that bottom part eccentric motion. But again, it's one of those things where it's getting a little bit better, but it's also still really, really slow. So yeah, it's a difficult skill for me. My body just isn't strong at that horizontal straight arm pushing plane. So I think anything plant related is a very weak element for me. Um, but it's also one of those things where it's like it's weak because I've skipped it for so long, or because I haven't trained it with structure the same way that I would have with my overhead pulling or horizontal pulling. So it's one of those things like with all these complicated drills and complicated skills, I think the more you like have blanks or like the more missing elements that you have at the beginning of your GST journey, the more complicated these things happen. Or these things get later in your journey. Like if I trained my planche lean strength properly from like day one 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't be struggling as much as I am now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
What I love about this stuff though is like just the way it stacks. I see gymnastics is it's very continuous. It's like you get the push up, so then the push up moves to the dip. You get the dip, and then that can move to ring dips and RTOs and back rolls, and then it can move to handstand push ups, and it can go in many different ways. But we start with some of these basic movements, and when you get them right and you build the correct mechanics, let's say, or understanding, then that strength starts to transfer into so many different elements, and it just seems never ending. Like, the Stalder press, we think of it as the straddle L sit. Well, you've got to get an L sit before you can get a straddle L sit. It's the flexibility there. And then it's like the pressing strength there, the planche lean. You're talking about tuck handstand coming down into the tuck planche. So it's handstand, it's balance. Like there's just so many key elements that just stack together. And if you're missing one of those elements, well, then good luck doing that skill because you're going to have to get that element in there. You're going to have to put that in there somewhere to better build that capacity to get to the next level if you look at it that way. Or, but then, you get the Stalder and it's like, well, where does that go next? And, there's so many different things we can just keep exploring. Whereas that's what one of the things that led me away from the typical sort of bench press, deadlifts, back squat, add more weight to the bar, add more weight to the bar. What do you do now? Like do more reps, do more weight. It got boring. Whereas like now, once you get a handstand, it's like, well, fuck, there's so many opportunities to take that in so many different ways. Um, and it's up to you as an individual. Like, where do you want to take it? But then it's also having that realization of, okay, if I want to get to a Stalder press, well, what does that actually mean I need to work on? Like really breaking that, breaking that down, understanding it. But it's just I think it's so much fun and it's so rewarding when it all does come together, when you get all those attributes to come together and the movement finally clicks and it's sort of just like you get it for the first time and then you probably lose it for a few weeks and then it comes back again and until you get to a stage where you can sort of just bust out that movement whenever you want, which is a pretty sort of cool feeling and an enjoying way to train for myself and other people that I work with. And I dare say the same for you, mate. Like what drives you and motivates you to want to get Stalder press or continue doing this sort of training?
Because I can't do it. It's like it's
Just
like
I
a
don't want to be defeated
stubbornness.
mindset.
Yeah, it's just like a stubbornness thing, and it's also just like hierarchically speak hierarchically speaking. I don't know if that's sort of the right word, but in terms of like strength hierarchy and gymnastic strength training hierarchy, like it's the thing that I should be able to do at this point in my training, or I should be able to achieve by now because I should have had those elements: straddle, L sit, planche, etc. Stalder press is just like the next thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's that path of progression, isn't it? Like you said, I think I think we just enjoy being on the journey of whatever it is that we're doing. So naturally, we just end up going towards the next progression.
Mm.
Yeah, whether that's in life or in GST.
Yeah, 100%, mate. I think it is that journey, and it's important to reflect on that journey because I think we can get overwhelmed with the frustration of learning skills.
Yeah,
But like, once you hit that hurdle, it's like, okay, I've achieved that. Sometimes that goalpost just moves. So
yeah,
it's like,
pretty much.
what do you appreciate about your training? And it's like, the small wins are definitely the big things to sort of pay attention to because it is a slow journey and it does take a long time with complex skills. There are just so many things
Yeah,
to master there, but I think being able to accept the small wins and be patient with it and sort of keep going and not to rush it, like we sort of
yeah.
talked about. But yeah,
I think
definitely
it.
been a good
I
conversation,
think
mate. We've covered a lot.
yeah. Just to very quickly touch on that last bit, I think it also exposes you to a new layer of like training environment in terms of people, because now you start looking at people who are now ahead of you in somewhere else. So let's say you're learning the press the handstand. Maybe you're following other people who are also learning it or have just learned it or who can do it. But then you reach it and you're like, okay, what's next? Okay, shoulder press. So now you level up in what you're watching and uh, including yourself in, if that makes sense, because you want to get that as well, and then it exposes you to the next layer of person. Whereas, like if you try and skip a few two layers ahead in terms of who you're watching, I don't think you fully appreciate the skill. If that makes sense, you're like, oh wow, this person can do like a one arm handstand flag press. It looks cool, but like you never really comprehend how hard that is. But then like now I'm actually watching a couple of people who are doing that, and these people like beyond me, like 5 to 10 years in their training, and they're complaining about how hard it is, and it's like, oh wow, I wouldn't have even like considered like how hard this could possibly be, because I'm not ready to go there yet, like mentally. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm so many layers behind still.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I think there's definitely a thing of like being able to watch other people do what you're working on though too. Like if you are doing press to handstand, watching videos of people doing press to handstand and that visualization sort of thing. I think so many of my clients dream about doing muscle ups before they get their first muscle up, and then it comes, you know. With the back
yeah,
roll for me, it was a lot of visualization. Like I would sit there and think about, okay, what am I doing wrong? What have I got to get right? And then like just try to visualize myself doing that movement, and that sort of definitely helped. And I was watching people do back rolls, or I was watching coaches coach back rolls and their way of doing it, and there might be just one small little cue that they give away, and you're like, oh, I haven't tried that. I got to think about that next time. And I think immersing yourself into that world or into that sort of skill is definitely a great way to see progress. And also just hearing stuff from different coaches. Like, we've all got great coaches. We all work differently with each other, different cues, different exercises. Sometimes just coming at it from a slightly different angle can work for someone else. And I know we don't want to go into Ep.8s too much, but it's one of the things I hate about social media is someone goes, stop doing this drill because it's shit. And I'm like, yeah, for most people it is, but there might be 5% or 2% of the people in the world where that drill actually might be quite quite a good little drill for someone to have. I think there's more than one way to skin the cat.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Pretty much. I'm not going to get into social media on this episode.
Don't open that can of worms. Awesome, man. It's been great to chat. Where can people get in touch, have a chat to you if they've got any questions, man?
You guys can always chat to me on Instagram at learning2human. Yeah, you can find me there. I'm not as active there at the moment in terms of posting, but I still use it, so you can always message there anytime.
Yeah, nice, mate. You got a website too?
Yeah, at www.learning2human.co.uk.
You're
Yeah.
showing your age now, mate. You don't have to put www in front of anything these days.
Do you not? Is that just like is that just the boomer thing?
That's like back in the 80s, I think.
Do people not do that anymore?
No.
Do you not do like the HTTPS
Yeah, no, I
colon
think
forward
that's
slash
taken
forward
over.
slash?
Yeah. Yeah. You've got your retreat coming up soon too, don't you? When's that happening?
That's in a month, just under a month now, actually. What date is it now? It's the 15th of August, so that's on the 9th of September. Yeah, so it's in like just over 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, flying out to the Azores in just under 2 weeks' time, and then gonna have about 2 weeks of time there to do some spearfishing, catch some food for the retreat, and then yeah, then we'll have the week of the retreat.
Awesome. Is there
So
still spots available, mate?
there are. If anyone wants to join in and come do some GST outside in nature and in a very wholesome environment, it's actually such an amazing island. It's everything that you eat there is all locally produced and locally caught, which is great. And you know, if you're having beef, it's like from your neighbor's cow, like literally across the field. So it's a really cool spot to basically train and sort of invest in your health a little bit. But I do have a few spots left if anyone wanted to join in.
Awesome, mate. And they just go to your website for that.
Exactly. Or send me a message and I'll send you all the info. But it's all on the website, learninghuman.co.uk/retreats. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome, mate. Cool. And if anyone's got questions for me, I'm at stretch.rainer on Instagram. Otherwise, it is tstmethod.com, which is the sustainable training method. What am I working on right now? I've gone back to pistol squats. I'm getting my pistol squat game on. I'm going to do a pistol squat program or template in the near future. So that'll be coming soon. Other than that, I'm just getting massive at the moment with my hypertrophy training. So just tune into the YouTube channel. To the Instagram feed for that. And the YouTube channel, sustainable training. That's sustainable training method on YouTube, and there's literally thousands of exercise videos and stuff on there. So if you want something to keep you busy for a while, immerse yourself in that.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right, mate. Great to chat to you. Look forward to catching up next month.
And you stretch.
Boom, that hour and a half went quick.
Yeah. Yeah.